Hello, and welcome to Bias, Not Biased, a podcast by me, Michel, a Brazilian designer living in Sydney, Australia. The goal of this podcast is to bring diverse voices to talk about equitable design, inclusion, and all things DEI, to talk about representation matters in the tech industry. Today we have the pleasure to talk to Kevin Bethune. Kevin is the founder and chief creative officer of Dreams Design Plus Life, a think tank that delivers design and innovation using a human-centered approach. Kevin's background spans engineering, business, and design, and represents creative problem solving that brings multidisciplinary teams together to see the future through an open aperture. His book, Reimagining Design, is out now, and we'll talk more about that. And now, Kevin Bethune. Hey, Kevin, thanks for joining.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. Thank you for having me.
No worries, man. Thank you. I appreciate you taking your time. Kevin, before we even start, let me ask you, where are you in the world? I don't know where.
So I'm based here in Redondo Beach, California, about 15 minutes from LAX airport.
Nice. That's so cool. I used to live, I actually lived very close before. I lived in Orange County for a little while. So I know the area at least. And can you tell me, what's your job? What do you do? So just so everyone can know who are we talking to?
Sure. I am the founder and chief creative officer of Dreams Design and Life. This is a design and innovation think tank that I started roughly 4 years ago. Previously, I was serving as the vice president of strategic design for BCG Digital Ventures, and that was an opportunity to really build an incubator inside of the BCG sort of ecosystem. In parallel with my work with Dreams Design and Life and my client partners, I also serve as the board chair for the Design Management Institute. It's a global collective of like-minded practitioners that place a strategic importance on design within organizations. And then definitely in parallel with all that, writing this first book and getting it out into the world.
All right. Well, I'm going to jump right into that one because that's one of the things that, of course, got me introduced to you. I work with this colleague at Atlassian called Dominique Ward. I'm going to give full credit to her because she was the one that mentioned the book. And so she mentioned, we were talking about books you should read, and she said there's a new book coming out by Kevin Bethune. It's called Reimagining Design, and instead of just asking you initially about the book, I'm going to ask you, why do we need to reimagine design?
Yeah, I honestly, I kind of have to go back to when there was the genesis or the seedling of an idea for a book. And I think it came from recent chapters having to had stand up in design and innovation capabilities, especially in spaces that didn't necessarily understand the power of design and creativity. But the contract for the book started at the beginning of the pandemic. So meanwhile, the world is crashing around us. We're in isolation, compounding pandemics. And I think there was this sort of epiphany between like the overt stuff we were seeing in the news, of all things, connecting to the covert when I reflected on my experiences and the learnings. Like it could have been easily an academic book that adds to design thinking canon. But the book sort of pivoted to this personal place, which I'm very thankful that the publishing team allowed me to go there. So this book is less about design thinking canon and more about design's positioning, and also connected to important threads of diversity. And I'm speaking for myself as a intersectional Black man navigating the corporate America arena, at least. And I speak on those learnings that bubbled up to the surface.
Right. And if you wanted to tell people why would I choose this book, right? Because again, you have a lot of books behind you. We have lots of design books here. What would make me pick Kevin's book? What's the main thing you would say? Like if you're looking for this is the book for you.
I think it was funny. A friend actually mentioned the other day, like, I'm reading your book and I'm really enjoying it. And I do think that it's not a typical book that's easy to market, because you can't just put it on one shelf. Like it doesn't just belong on the design shelf, doesn't just belong on the business shelf, it could belong on the leadership shelf. But honestly, I wrote this for creatively curious folks. I wrote it for designers to find more courage in terms of ways that they can garner more impact. I wrote it for non-designers who are now going to be sort of in the room more and more in multidisciplinary situations. The way the world is moving, the speed of computation, we have to garner more multidisciplinary bandwidth for collaboration. And I honestly believe that that's the currency of where future innovation is going to come from, to be relevant, to be able to be resilient and flexible based on the way the world is moving. So that's why I recommend this book for really anyone that's creatively curious.
Nice, love it. Creatively curious is a great term. I will definitely quote you on that one. And I mean, I of course we want to talk about more things, but I still have one more question. What made you want to write a book? What was the catalyst that said, like, I have this thing that I have to share?
Definitely writing a book was not on the career bingo card.
Good to know.
But I think when I navigated the BCG environment, that culture, but at the parent company level, as well as what we were creating at Digital Ventures, there was this word that one of my mentors, leaders that I was working with and for, he would use this word: pay attention to the eminence of BCG's culture. Like, the consultants are flying all around the world to client sites, but while they were consulting, they were also always writing. They were always going to conferences to speak about the learnings from their cases. And it was like part of just the DNA of the culture everywhere. Every consultant was doing something like that. And as we were scaling Digital Ventures, which was very much a new runway for the space, we had learnings to share. And so I leaned into organizations like DMI, AIGA, IDSA, giving talks around the learnings we were having as designers navigating in unfamiliar spaces. And that kind of snowballed. That eminence just kept going, like from talks at conferences to eventually a TED Talk in Milan to eventually more things. And then the book idea of, like, how do I codify the learnings in a book? Let's think about that.
Nice. Love it. Awesome. Okay, we're going to take a huge step back now. We're going to go back to the beginning. Kevin, how did you start in design? How did a career start? Where did the idea of being a designer, or even, is that where you started from?
Actually, it came from a different place, honestly. I found design mid-career.
Nice.
I drew for hobby, like any curious, creative kid. But where I was raised for the most part was downriver Detroit, Michigan area, heart of automotive country, all the American automotive brands at least. And all the neighbors were business people or technicians or engineers working for the factories. And so that was sort of the worldview. Design or art was like a fleeting notion. And as much as parents sacrifice to send their kids to college, even having the remote miracle of that being a possibility,
yep.
There better have been a pragmatic job on the other side. So I think the intersections of like drawing and math and science, engineering made more sense for me. So I started there. I worked in nuclear power, if you could believe that, for a number of years, cutting my teeth on reactors and traveling the world, helping nuclear plants. And it's funny, life comes at you fast. Different curiosities sort of come into the picture. I wanted a bit more agency for where my technological career was going. And I just realized that I lacked the language of business to understand how to garner that agency. Right. That curiosity led me to business school. And instead of going back to an engineering organization after my MBA, I told myself, you know what, that creative itch from my youth, I want to go into an environment that has that in addition to the strategy and technology. So that's when Nike came into the picture. And I saw design professionally for the first time in a Nike environment.
Amazing. That's really cool. And this may be awkward or weird to ask, but at the same time, it's part of the podcast, right? So the idea of the podcast is that we're building stuff by us and we're fighting biases, right? So we're not biased. But did you have any challenges or biases when you started out in the design world because of anything, again, like you said, being, an African-American, a Black man, or coming from, I don't know, even from your background, right? From not starting in design initially and not going maybe to design school. Is there anything that happened to you that you could share?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think Nike was my first taste, and I'll get to it later, in that I made a decision to go back for more grad schooling, and that's where I formalized my design foundation through additional education. So I did end up in design school, but Nike was sort of my first exposure, and I'm super grateful to that organization because there were mentors I met along the path that gave me chances. They gave me briefs without a home, without a designer to them, so that I could learn under their wing and try some things. But here I was, a product person, but I was coming into Nike as a business planner at a B school. So people just saw the title and assumed numbers guy, put him in a box, he's over here. But I creative curiosity, right? I wanted to learn like what other people were doing. And 9 times out of 10, people were like, that's a numbers guy. I don't really see it. Kind of get out of here, go get another business job. But 1 out of 10 did see it and would listen to my curiosities and entertain it. But I did notice, to your question, that there were very few folks that looked like me. And meanwhile, like I'm looking at the demographics outside of the company walls, the beautiful mosaic of the world that is so diverse. Right. I didn't necessarily see that in all the spaces I navigated, and at times being in the room, I felt like the other, whether it was in my day job or doing my design side hustles. I definitely felt like the other at times where I wasn't felt, or like what was valued or what was celebrated wasn't my archetype. I felt that.
And do you feel you had to in any way modify your behavior to fit that, or to be in that, almost masking, or what's the other word, like code switching to be part of that culture?
Yeah, I definitely remember spending a lot of energy just trying to make others comfortable with me in the room. Right. And it took me a while to realize how taxing and how burdensome that was. And when I left, having to unpack that over time,
Right. Got it. But so that, of course, being how you started, what inspires you to still be in design today?
I love that design has become my tip of the spear. I think it was a huge career gamble to like have the choice of staying at Nike doing more side hustles until they fully credentialed me as a designer, or going back for more schooling, which people thought I was nuts for doing that. But I went to Art Center College of Design for 2 more years of grad study, solidified my ID foundation. And at the time, Art Center had changed to really embrace multidisciplinary cohesion. And I realized I didn't have to leave my business and tech background behind. It could all cement together. So in a way, it gave me a lot of courage because I took that gamble to say, you know what, regardless of what anyone says, or regardless of how certain spaces view me as the other, I've made this investment. The career is mine now. I'm not relying on a brand to dictate where I go. This is my gamble on myself. And I became less concerned about what others thought of me. And I was just going to be myself. I was going to leverage what I invested in with courage to show people what was possible.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's great. And Kevin, interesting thing there. So like you said, you started maybe on the almost engineering side, going to business, and then going to design. Do you think that that's a valuable thing for people that are already in design to maybe reflect back and go like, hey, maybe adding a business background, maybe adding some of these other things actually can unlock that almost the multidisciplinary thing within yourself to be able to work better within these? Because the reason I ask this is most designers in larger companies or startups, they usually deal with the triads, right? So they have the engineering side, and they have the product side, and they have the design side. But you are just one of those, And I personally noticed that when you have more to give, when you come from having understanding of business and you come from having understanding of engineering, you're going to be able to do that better. So I'm basically asking, does that make sense to you? Do you think that having that actually takes you one step further and makes you be like, already, because I can understand all these groups, I can communicate with them better, I can be part of this group better, and that can drive design forward?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think what the future requires of us is more of that multidisciplinary cohesion. And so how do you make that real, though? Because I think everyone is familiar with the Venn diagrams overlapping and, but as much as I navigate, at least corporate America, global enterprises, the amount of time you spend in multidisciplinary situations still very much is the exception, not the rule. Right. But the futures, if the last 24 months have shown us anything, it needs to be more of the rule. And then how do you do it? So in the book, I sort of navigate this orchestration around this notion of breadth and depth. So as to your question around like a designer, does the designer need to learn these other things? Well, from a breadth perspective, I think we should learn like how can we better collaborate, communicate, and strategically align around the key imperatives with other disciplines that are now in the room. They're going to be more in the room more than ever as we move forward. So what's our, for you and I, like, what is your unique answer to breadth that works for you as you engage other people, empathize with other stakeholders? And what is my unique breadth signature of how I galvanize a room? But we still also need our depth of expertise. So the designer still needs to be the designer. They need to get out of the team room and understand how to leverage their verticals of experience. And maybe they garner another vertical over time. Maybe something about that breadth. Maybe they learn how to code the best front-end applications.
For sure. It could. It was a requirement in one of the companies I worked that you, as a designer, you had to code. So it depends, right? So it's a variable. If I had to ask you, could you point out, do you think you have a secret superpower, something that makes you unique and drives you through your career or powers you through your career? And what would that be?
Yeah. There's probably a couple answers depending on the day you ask that question. But right now, I think the most energy I feel when I reflect back is the power of visualization. Now, granted, I've had to take my multidisciplinary experiences into leadership responsibilities, to stand up capabilities, to help client partners galvanize design and innovation opportunities, and like help them hire designers. I had to build a few teams several times. So I could be looked at as, Kevin's just a design leader / facilitator of the capability. He's a org builder. He's a process guy. And those could be some of the common misperceptions about but what I get most energy out of is when I just view myself as a problem solver, and I use visuals as a strength to do that. So whether it's picking up the whiteboard marker to leverage my breath and get a room rallying around that imperatives, I'll do that. But then I also like to go deep and design a connected device for a Internet of Things startup. And I love to sweat out the craft of visual communication to articulate ideas. So visuals has always been a defining thread, I think, in my toolkit of superpowers.
That's awesome. So the other thing that comes to mind when you mention multidisciplinary to me is, so there's a lot of talk, of course, this podcast is one, but there's a lot of talk about diversity, DEI, and bringing people from all cultures and backgrounds and, genres, whatever you want, right? Any kind of, how does that play into your multidisciplinary thinking? Is there a place in there where not only you have to be multidisciplinary, but include as much different backgrounds? Because it creates this question to me, like, is it people from, and look, it's a tough one. Because when people say diversity, they mean one specific thing nowadays, right? They mean it's, we're looking at this. And what I'm trying to say is there more to that? Is the diversity of, age groups and people that come from different types of companies with scales that are different even, right? I mean, it can be a lot of different things in the same room. That's why I like the multidisciplinary thing. And I'm almost thinking, is there a multi-diversity or another word that we need for diversity that makes it a little bit more expensive in a way?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I do believe the end state is sort of that intersectional, multifaceted human representation that mirrors the tapestry that is the world, like that. But unfortunately, especially in our field, navigating a lot of spaces, you do tend to look at obvious dimensions that are just sorely behind, whether it's women, BIPOC.
Yeah, 100%.
Pick your angle.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. That's why the question comes up, because again, of course, I'm talking about it. So I see exactly that, which all credit to it, right? We need it. Like you said, it is behind. It's not like you're going to look at the industry and you're going to see it's 3% BIPOC, I think still. I think it was one something. It's in design, of course, not in tech, and which I did think is interesting. So we're trying to be more a part of this multidisciplinary group, and tech seems to be more as development, engineering seems to be more accepting than design. They seem to have less gatekeeping. They seem to be more open. You notice more, diverse groups. If it is, people from different countries, nationalities, LGBTQ, like you notice more of that on the engineering side. I don't know if you noticed that, if you've seen anything like that, and if you see any reason why that would be.
It is a really excellent point. a question that you're raising, because I think as you describe it, comparing the disciplines, it does resonate. I do see a little bit more traction with tech sectors, engineering. And I wonder if design is still like the least understood coming to the strategy table compared to the other disciplines, to realize the gap. And unfortunately design could either play to like, oh, we're the final step in the value chain, or the beautification step, which we know is a falsehood. Or it's so magical that we're sort of design purists, and you can't touch our method and you can't touch our pedagogy. And if we're honest, like the pedagogy that we've all learned under or navigated was dictated by very few in positions of power and privilege.
Yeah.
But what I get tired of, again, I can speak for my only myself as a black,
of course,
but I grew tired of seeing the blind spots overlooked or the biases unchecked, and we've spit out product that is sort of myopic or naive, or in the worst situations causes harm because the guiding principles haven't been vetted by an appropriate team.
Of course.
Yeah.
No, I 100% understand that. And again, of course, through my lens of being from a country like Brazil, which, most people don't understand. There's a funny anecdote. There's this designer researcher called Nancy Duyon, I think is her name. And she's from the Caribbean. She's an African-American woman, and she was pregnant when she did this conference that I watched. But the funny thing she mentions the pregnant side. That's why I'm bringing it up. She's like, I'm black and I'm pregnant. And this white boy says to me, like, I understand you. I feel you. I have empathy for you. She's like, no. You ask me what I feel, right? You talk to me. It's not for me, it's by me, right? But she brought up, like, she worked at Uber, and she mentioned, like, going to a country like Brazil changes your mind, because you have to open up to, like, the possibilities that everything you think is wrong. Uber's whole predication was like, you click a button, the car comes, and you hop in, and you don't even look at your watch to pay, phone to pay, whatever. It's paid, right? And in Brazil, people are like, can I pay with cash? And they're like, why? It's the cars. No, but that's how I live, right? I live with cash, right? And so they had to open up their mind. And of course, Silicon Valley was not understanding that. They could not grasp that. So that's why for me, again, from my Brazilian lens, I'm like, that makes total sense. I know what you mean. People there walk with cash. But for the Silicon Valley folks in the room, it was really hard to grasp. All right, I'm going to go ahead.
No, just another anecdote to follow that one.
Please.
A couple months ago, there's a renowned executive design recruiter, Rita Sue Siegel. She like seeded most design leaders back in the day. Like, she's still thriving in New York, but she texted me one day, like, tell the young generation that if they ignore the senior experienced generations, it will be at their peril.
Oh yeah.
And she's so right, because ageism is a real thing.
Oh, it is.
And we're not tapping into the wisdom that is clearly there. And what if we connect wisdoms up and down the generational strata?
So what's funny about that? You see how weird it is with stories, right? So one thing connects to another. I did a design challenge, a whiteboard challenge. And the whiteboard challenge was, real challenge, by the way, design an alarm clock, right? But it only has one button, and it needs these 4 functions, right? And there's no touch screen, and there's no voice activated. And I'm like, yeah, I've had that. Like, I've lived for that. I've seen it in my house, And of course I could totally describe the thing, and the person is going like, whoa, I'm mind blown. How could you do that in so little time? I'm like, because that actually existed like 15, 20 years ago. You're not imagining a new future. You're talking about the past that you don't even know exists.
Yep, totally.
So it's important to talk about the past so we can drive people into the future. That's the point that I was trying to make with that, but it's a good one. Yeah. And on that note, I'm going to ask you, so, from your career, from your learnings, is there any advice you would give for people that are either starting out or dealing with their own challenges of biases and in their careers? Any kind of learning you would like to share?
Yeah, no, I think upon reflection, no matter if you're a student starting out, thinking about your career for the first time, or you're a mid-career person and you're wondering, does that other department, like, could I get some analogous or adjacent experience to add to my breadth and depth, my toolkit, my experience over there? And, or, you're just thinking about like making a transition to a different industry. Like, I just hope that people, after they read the book, they realize that a lot is possible. Like if you lean into your curiosity concertedly and like experiment with it, an experiment could be having that coffee chat with someone in a different department, or investigating, taking a class. Doesn't have to be going back to get a degree, but it could be something to invest in yourself, or making something. And I think every one of those experiments garners evidence that you can hold up, not just for others to see, but for yourself to say, can I step forward with confidence and credibility? Is there something to this? And it's not about experimenting in any and all directions aimlessly. I think we all still see unmet needs that we want to potentially address and maybe leave our mark on to make the world a better place, hopefully. And those convictions, we have to sort of listen to what that inner child is saying and what we're sort of in tune to, and go in that direction and lean in and experiment forward.
That's awesome. And the other thing I've been doing, Kevin, if you have a chance, is there any podcast, book, anything you would recommend for people that are interested in, of course, expanding their thoughts and their ideas? The same way that's how I found you. I ask you the same. Like, is there anything you would share with others?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like certain communities have been transformative. Like I've leaned into the Design Management Institute as we were sort of building capabilities in spaces that didn't know the power. Like we didn't have all the answers, so we needed to lean into communities to find inspiration and best practices. But then I've also followed particular luminaries that I looked up to for a long time. Folks like Dr. John Maida, where he was like the consummate polymath before I even knew polymath was a word. And I was like, oh, that I feel like what he's done. I feel a little bit of what I was doing was sort of mapping to that, even though he was like this hero and had this huge accomplished set of work. But I aspired to like be like him one day. So following his work, reading his books, and seeing the luminaries that he was excited by, your Kat Holmes, your Annie Jean Baptiste, these are folks that, I go consume their books. I go follow their work and get inspiration.
That's awesome. I really appreciate that. And last one, do you think, and this is always a tough one for some people, but I'm going to try anyway. Do you think you've made it, Kevin? Is there a moment where you look back and you go like, I made it?
No. I hope. I always feel like I have something to learn, and I will, if not already, like be more curious in future years than I am now.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time and joining me on the podcast. I really appreciate your time and your sharing with everyone.
Thank you for having me. No, this has been great conversation, and I love this platform that you're cultivating. It's great.
Thank you. Thanks for watching this episode, and if you liked it, share with your friends, give us a like, and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.